Hello and welcome back to another video. This time, the one you've been waiting for, a closer look at my Lotus Esprit. So here we are then, back in my parents' house after the lockdown has been ever so slightly slackened. Being careful to keep a 2 metre distance from my parents here, although my dad's definitely had it and my mum more than likely has. It's still advisable obviously to try and keep your distance. So seeing a car again, kind of have a look at it in a bit more detail. What I won't do is talk too much about sort of the history of the Esprit, because I could talk for hours about that. And there's loads of interesting stuff like how it's made and some of the sort of technology that was incorporated into this car, but that's probably best saved for another day, maybe an in detail series, which is kind of what I like to do anyway. So we may as well start off with where I'm sat, the interior. So for anyone who watched my previous video, you would have seen that the interior is fairly rotten in this car, with bits of trim falling apart on cue, and it's probably the worst thing about it. So moisture has got in here, and every single surface, metallic surface certainly, has got corrosion on it. And at some point, once I start to strip this thing down, try and assess how badly that's got into things like the wooden bulkhead and the sort of metal supporting struts under the dash. A lot of the trim can be sort of redone by hand. I don't think it's too complicated. Fiddly certainly, but I don't think it requires any specialist tools or anything. One thing I'm pretty pleased about though, and that's the leather trim. That seems to have worn particularly well. I mean, considering it's a 30,000 mile car, you expect it to be in okay condition anyway, but it looked pretty faded and dry when I first got the car. But I've been applying some lanolin and beeswax material, product to the surface of it, and it's starting to come up quite nicely actually. So I've got a couple of pictures. I don't know if they'll show too much sort of the before and after of just sort of one application of this. The garage who sold it to me had started on the driver's seat, so that was in slightly better condition, but the passenger seat was untouched, and I've started having a go at that, and it's looking better already. So a few applications of that will bring that up, and hopefully when I come to redo the seat, because I expect I want to replace the foam inside, that's probably gone a bit powdery by now. Hopefully that'll make the leather supple enough to take off the frame without ripping it, but we'll just have to see about that. It'd be nice to keep the original leather because it's going to have quite a nice sort of patina to it, kind of showing its age a bit, but you quite like that about a classic car anyway. As I said, like the instrument binnacle and steering wheel is, they've got all the metallic parts have got corrosion on them, and you can buy replacement bits and pieces, but I'm going to try and retain as much of the original stuff as possible and just try and clean it up or repaint it, and see if I can get away with keeping as much as I can of the original bits and pieces there. What I won't be able to keep obviously is things like screws and stuff that have got all their heads crusted up and things. It's just impractical to try and use that to screw the car back together again. I'm a bit worried about availability of parts for some of the stuff, so the things that are shared with other cars, which there's quite a lot of, to be fair, like the door handles are Morris Marina, so it shouldn't be too hard to get hold of, and the insides I think pretty similar to MGB door handles, are later types, so I don't know if they're the same sort, but they're sort of readily available. But it's the more bespoke items I'm slightly worried about, so again hopefully we can save as much as we can of this car. So the interior is super nice, I think. I mean, it's a proper sort of 70s car, and I like the way this gauge pod sort of sits on the dash, sort of almost like some sort of gauge pod from a spaceship or something. It's very sort of 2001 Space Odyssey in my opinion, and kind of adds to that. I think I said it in my previous video, that sort of prototype car for the road in some way. It's not the most practical looking thing with all the switches up there, but it certainly looks pretty cool in my book. So that's pretty much what we want to talk about for the interior. If we talk about the body a bit now, so from 10 feet away or so, this car doesn't look in too bad shape, but on close inspection you'll see all sorts of stuff, like every single metallic surface, like I said about the interior, is covered in corrosion, and it's things like these trim panels around the windows as well, just completely rusty. So all of that stuff's got to come off the car and either sanded down and repainted or replaced if it's too far gone. So the body's got this kind of blistering on it, kind of like acne. So I don't know what's going on under there. Probably some sort of moisture's got under the paint, so hopefully the fiberglass isn't compromised. But I'm also a bit worried about things like this, where someone's obviously had a go at repairing cracks and things, and I don't know what's lurking under here. So obviously this car will need to get completely resprayed and repaired. Accident wise, I don't think it's got anything accident on it, except potentially this front corner, which is a little bit discoloured, and see a few cracks going on here. So again, this could be some area that needs a proper repair. Being such a low mileage car, it's a shame that the body has also got like corrosion over everything, and you can see in there that the spare wheel's never been used, and the paper tag is still on there. So original spare, all of the frilly bits of rubber on it, so never actually been out of there, and that's why I think I'd like to keep it its original colour, silver and red. But as I was saying, I quite like the silver and red combo for the outside and inside respectively. I think that's quite a classic look, and I'll be looking to retain that. But the kind of things I might change are these like gold pinstripes. I'm not too sure they really suit the colour combination there, and the sort of scripting in gold, I think I might probably replace that with black, because that'll probably match the sort of waistline trim a bit better, and the wheels and stuff. So the wheels are another thing actually. I really love the Speedline alloy wheels. These ones have had a bit of a strange sort of diamond cut or paint treatment where they're sort of black and silver. I don't actually mind the look of those too much. They normally would have come silver from the factory, so might go back to that look, but I think it's quite a nice contrast. I mean, I don't generally like black wheels. I think they look a bit naff and tacky, but I think they sort of suit this car somehow. But yeah, I mean, that's a long way down the road in this restoration, and this is going to take me a long time, so the progress is going to be pretty slow, I think. So one thing I did try and get a look at was the chassis, and I'm not really too sure where to jack this car, and I don't really want to do it wrong and break something. So if anybody's got any advice on jacking a Series 2 Lotus Esprit, then do let me know. But from what I can see, the chassis underneath is covered in sort of surface corrosion as well, so it looks like that's going to have to come out and be blasted. So that's another big challenge there. I mean, everyone has to do it who does a full-on Lotus Esprit rebuild. I was kind of hoping it was something I'd be saved from, but if we're going to do this thing properly, then that's what needs to happen. So the next thing to talk about, I guess, is the engine. So there's not really too much to say about it, except I haven't attempted to start it. Obviously, there's no battery in there anyway, and I don't think it'd be wise to try and do that. But it needs a proper sort of rebuild, I should think, to sort of make sure it's not going to explode. But I really love the fact that it's right behind the passenger compartment. I love the fact it's sort of longitudinally oriented in the engine bay there, real sort of supercar DNA. Even though this car hasn't got the straight line speed, it's got all the ingredients of a supercar, and it was it was competing for supercar type customers with Lamborghini and Ferrari back in the day anyway, being the price of a average house. So yeah, even though the sort of straight line speed wasn't sparkling, the handling was, and it was certainly exotic enough to tempt buyers into buying this over those more established rivals. But yeah, so the engine, again, I'll probably do an in detail video on the 907 engine in general, but it's a twin cam 16 valve engine, which all aluminium construction, which is pretty good for the time. I mean, this car 1979, and the MGB was still being built then, and if you kind of look at the MGB and the Lotus Esprit as two sort of separate models, okay, complete opposite ends of the market. I mean, MGB is a sort of sports car for the masses, whereas this was very much a hand-built, limited run type car. But the technology that's incorporated into this is streets ahead of the more run-of-the-mill stuff that's being produced at the time. And I mean, it's relatively high performance output given the capacity of the engine, so 2 litres but 160 horsepower, so not too bad there for the power output. But yeah, I mean, as I said, it's going to need a full do-over. And other features of this car, which you don't really notice till you get up close to it, are just sort of the proportions of it. So low and quite wide as well, and it really does kind of look like a sort of supercar in terms of its proportions, and I mean it's pretty tiny, this thing, in terms of like length and things, but it's actually, you know, wider than some modern cars, and it's got presence, I think, this car, and once it's back on the road, I think it'll be a great thing to drive around in. It certainly feels pretty cool sat in this driver's seat, even with the rusty gauges staring back at me. And it's things like these, like air scoops by the rear windows that have a function. You know, they cool the engine and feed the air box. Little like details like that really kind of make it feel like a proper thing, rather than just a bit of trim. So a lot of cars nowadays have sort of fake scoops and you know, grills that are blanked off and don't do anything, purely styling. But the stuff that's incorporated into this car are there because they have to be for, you know, a specific purpose, and anything else is extra weight, which obviously isn't the sort of Lotus mantra. It's simplify and add lightness, I think was the term. And like I said, I'm going to go into more detail in another series of stuff, but it's things like the rear suspension setup. So using the drive shaft as the sort of top part of the suspension there, rather than having like a separate wishbone to, you know, reduces weight. I mean, it means your drive shafts wear out pretty quick, but it also means that this is as light as it can be generally. I mean, there are some other bits and pieces like chunky metal items that maybe don't need to be quite as chunky, but overall it's a pretty, you know, light car, really. I mean, this is actually lighter, I think, than the MG. I think for a European spec it's under 1,000 kilograms, and then federal cars were like 1,060 kilograms, something like that. Whereas the MGB, or my GT, is just over a ton, so heavier than this, but with about half the horsepower. So yeah, it should make a nice drive, this, when it's all finished. It's just getting there, I think. So I'll wrap up just by putting a few sort of pictures of the car, or a few videos of the car, just to show off some of the details and some of the more sort of grim parts of it. But yeah, until the next time, I think the next video I'll probably concentrate on a bit of a plan of attack, what I'm going to do with it. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully bring you some more Lotus updates in the very near future. See you later.